Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive.
Quite frankly, I get most of my news from you.
Joan Esposito.
Y'all ready for this?
On WCPT 820.
Those of you who listen all the time know that probably my favorite political magazine is Washington Monthly. There are other magazines that do some great political reporting, but Washington Monthly seems to be on top of everything in a way that sets it apart. And one of the people who is a big contributor there is Bill Scher, who has a new article out and is here to talk about it. Bill, how are you?
I'm good. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
And it is always a pleasure to chat with you. Your newest article, I think this is the newest one. Yes, it posted today. Should we ever trust polls again? Bill, my answer is no. I tell the audience that I think that polling is no longer as accurate as it was 20 years ago. And I try not to talk about them. But it's like potato chips. You know, you say you're never going to eat one again, but then somebody brings a bag home and it's all crunchy and crinkly. And there you go. And I can't quit the polls. Bill, help me.
That's a good analogy. And look, as I said in the article, it's not like every poll is wrong. We've had examples of good polling this election cycle. And usually when polls are correct, you don't notice as readily. They were accurate in the run-up to the Georgia Republican Senate primary, the Texas Democratic Senate primary, the California gubernatorial primary. So it's like they're always wrong, but we have some very glaring examples of them not being correct. Two huge whiffs in Michigan and Wisconsin this month. And I wrote about this a month ago. I do have a column today, but I flagged a month ago after Graham Plattner bowed out, taking a hard look at how polls informed that race's narrative over the course of the 6 months prior. Because one of the big reasons why Plattner hung around so long is that he seemed to be maintaining a healthy standing in the polls, even when various scandalous information seemed to be coming forth. And people, somebody wanted to believe that it didn't matter. People didn't care. He's not just beating Janet Mills in the primary. He's beating Susan Collins in the general election polling. It's all going to be okay. And a lot of that polling came from the Plattner campaign or allied organizations, because there's two things going on in the polling industry that are relevant here. One, you note they're not necessarily as accurate as they used to be. We have a decline in high quality polling backed by major media institutions because it has gotten too expensive to call people. Too many people screen out unknown phone numbers. And so it takes more time to reach people on the phone and get a big enough sample. And a lot of people are saying it's not worth the money to do this anymore. And so you're left with cheaper techniques done by fly-by-night organizations that don't have good track records. And so that quality is declining. And on top of that, you might say, well, good. Who won all that media polling anyway? All this horse race news coverage that was poll-driven was always corrosive. We weren't talking about the issues enough, and I get that. But now we see what happens when the media doesn't poll. That vacuum is flooded by campaign internal polling, which gets spun as being credible, and it's there to shape narratives. And so you had this period in Maine after the initial, the Reddit post about Plattner came out, the first batch of them, the stuff about the tattoo came out. This is all in October last year. But then the polling you see, November, December, it's showing him holding on, growing his lead. And then maybe people think, it's all going to be okay. And it saps Janet Mills' fundraising to the point where she quits. So this is not even just something happening in kind of a theoretical abstract space. It is impacting actual campaigns. It forced Janet Mills to drop out. It forces Mallory McMoore to drop out in Michigan. It forces Mandela Barnes to drop out in Wisconsin. It has a real impact. And then you learn in the cases of Michigan and Wisconsin, maybe those polls weren't on the market in the first place, and maybe you didn't have to quit, or your donor shouldn't have shut their pocketbooks because of it, because it wasn't as accurate as you thought it was going to be. So I think it is a real problem the way it is impacting campaigns in these primaries. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that every single poll is going to be wrong, but you do have to be judicious and not assume that a poll before election day is fixed and no developments can happen. People can't change their minds. You got to run through the tape regardless of whatever the polls say.
And in Wisconsin, perfect example of that, David Crowley did quit. He did back away from the race. And then when Sarah Rodriguez's campaign blew up because of the financial difficulties, then David Crowley was back in the race. And I've heard a phrase recently, or not, I've read a phrase recently about polling, and it's called partisan polling. It's like you get a Republican polling organization to do polling on your Republican candidate, and lo and behold, the polling is great. The polling is great.
Well, we saw this. Interesting. We did not see as much of that in Wisconsin. We saw more of that in Michigan. So you have so in June in Michigan, you get a whole bunch of polls that come out from Abdul Saeed allied organizations saying he's up by double digits. And there was a smattering of polling before that had more of a mixed picture. And then you had some independent polling that seemed to back that up. And so it seems more legitimate. And that could have been a phenomenon known as herding, where pollsters consciously or unconsciously don't want to be outliers. And so maybe they fiddle with their weighting of the demographics, or they just on the front end say, well, if this guy thinks it's going to be more of a younger electorate, I'll say the same thing with my assumptions. And then once you had a bunch of polls that came out at the very end that all seemed like it was going to go big for LC, and everyone just assumed this was going to be a landslide, and it wasn't a landslide.
No.
Still won. And a lot of the postmortem said, well, maybe we're not reaching older voters or low-income voters. The younger, college-educated, more passionately ideological are more willing to either pick up the phone, or when they do text to web, they answer the text on their phones. My 89-year-old mother has a flip phone. She's not doing a text to web, poll if it gets sent to her.
And just to be clear, text to web is like somebody texts you a QR code or something that takes you to a website?
Yeah, they'll say, we're doing a survey, click this link to fill out the survey. So you got to take that step to click that link and agree.
Well, you know why I don't do that? I never do that, because it seems to me I can't tell what is a legitimate political request and what is a thinly veiled request for money. Oh, click this button. If you hate Donald Trump, you hate Donald Trump too. Send me money.
And I think it's absolutely right. And I want to say one point about El Sayed. I don't think this. I don't intend this to say to speak ill of El Sayed because of this. I do think there's been a tendency in this cycle for the more progressive insurgent candidate to use this tactic of churning out favorable poll numbers, because it helps legitimize a candidate that might not otherwise be taken seriously by the media. So I understand the incentive of doing it, and you could certainly argue that it worked at the end of the day for El Sayed, but I do think there's a flip side to it, or a potential flip side to it. And I can't know what's true here. Maybe on election day, his people were less likely to turn out because they thought they had it in the bag. Mm-hmm. And maybe the Haley Stevens voters thought, oh man, I better show up because it looks like my girl's going to lose. I better make sure I get out there. You don't know. I mean, we can't get the data to prove that. But something went awry, whether it was on the data itself or how people reacted to it. There's definitely a tendency, I think, across the board these days, and some of this is maybe fed by these betting markets, these political prediction markets, where you get a poll number a month out, and everyone thinks that this means that it's over, that it's done. And there's no reason to. We've so many cases in history where people make comebacks or news developments happen that weren't known at the point of the poll. mean, go back to, and I said this in the column today, and I'm sorry for those of you who aren't sports fans. Look at the NBA Finals. Look at the New York Knicks. If they looked at the scoreboard in the third quarter and said it were down by 29 points, forget it. This game is over. They wouldn't be champions today. You got to run through the tape. You can't assume the game is over before it is over.
Francesca Hong, a couple of weeks before the election, the polls I was seeing had her up like by 40 points. And obviously she lost. Now, it was close, but she still lost. And I've talked to some people about that, Bill, and they were like, oh, well, the last 2 weeks, her campaigning was really bad. I mean, she was being ripped apart by the there should never be Thanksgiving ever again. Some of the Graham Plattner and others have in the past put things on social media that they have to walk back. A lot of progressives are now walking back any text about defund the police. But she didn't seem to, I don't know if she didn't expect how they would go after her, but she didn't seem to be ready for it. She didn't seem to have good answers. So the way this was explained to me, oh yeah, well, she probably was hugely ahead in the polls, but she had such a bad 2 weeks before the election that erased her lead. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that there's a lot to that. And we see other examples a lot of times in presidential primaries. Someone will get ahead of steam. Someone will have a good media appearance or a good debate appearance, a good ad, and they'll spike in the polls. And then the media spotlight really bears in. And that's a test. How do you handle it when the media spotlight is on you? Do you have the candidate's skills to withstand that kind of scrutiny? And I think the way Francesca Hong handled those questions, her interview style is kind of shaky, very, very tentative. And I hate to be, a theater critic here. But in some ways, she's the polar opposite of Abdul El Sayed, who is very brash and so uber confident in every interview. And that gives people a sense of, it can soothe people, make them think he's got this. But I think there's also danger in that approach as well, because sometimes you get so cocky that you say things that aren't smart and they bite you later. In the case of Francesca Hong, she came across more tentative, and that definitely sapped confidence in her ability to go the distance. And she was only seemingly the front runner for a short period of time, and that's not enough to really be sturdy and stable. And Crowley was able to, even though he quit before, to get back in. I mean, and the fact that the incumbent governor was his wingman, I think plays a big role here. He played a more active role as a surrogate than, say, Gretchen Whitmer did in Michigan for Haley Stevens. She did an endorsement, but didn't go on the trail and throw roundhouses the way that Tony Evers was to Francesca Hong. And that late movement towards Crowley, a poll's not necessarily going to pick that up. They're in the field maybe a week out. If there's going to be a late break in the last 48 hours, a poll's not going to catch that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I'm talking with Bill Scher. He has a new article in Washington Monthly magazine. You can find it at washingtonmonthly.com. Should we ever trust polls again? Bill and I are going to take a break, but we will be back with more.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Bill Scher's most recent article in Washington Monthly magazine is about polling. Bill, today's Friday. Time is fluid in my world, Bill. I think it was earlier this week that I spoke to Peter Giangreco, who is with the Strategy Group. They advise a lot of national candidates. And I said to him, why does it seem like candidates have better polling than is released to the rest of us? Like I said, I've been covering candidates for a long time, and they seem to know, the day of the election, even though they might be, shaking hands, they already know they're going to lose, and why does it seem like that polling is so much more accurate? And Peter said, well, it's because it is. It's a different kind of polling. It is much, much, much more expensive and much more specific. Like, instead of saying, we're gonna survey all the voters who live in Milwaukee, it's more like, okay, this is the state. These are the demographics as far as ethnicity and race. We're looking at geography. They will say, okay, these are the representative folks we need. We need a white woman in her 60s who went to college and lives in the suburbs of Milwaukee. And he said they work until they find exactly the person that they feel their polling needs. And he said it is much more accurate. It is also very, very expensive, which is why not every candidate does it. But the thing I thought was interesting is sometimes he will judge a race, like somebody, let's say that you've got a candidate and their internal polling shows that they really have like a 20-point lead. And sometimes candidates will release that. We've done polling. I am so far ahead. And then as the election gets closer, they no longer release any polling. They no longer talk about their internal polling. And Peter said, and there's your indication that the polls are not as strong for them as they once were. What do you think about this very expensive secret polling?
Well, I think I agree with that. I mean, good polling is expensive. It takes time because people are hard to get on the phone. It takes more time to get a perfectly set demographic mix that you need. There's an extra complication, particularly in primaries, because you might not know what demographic mix you need. You may not know what the turnout mix is going to be in a particular race, because it's not like a general election where you have a pretty good idea how many Republicans and Democrats are going to show up in a particular state or a county or precinct. But primary, the types of candidates in primaries change cycle to cycle. If there even is a competitive race, there might have been a competitive race for that particular office for 10, 20 years. So it's a lot more guesswork there. I do take issue with the notion that if you're not putting out the internals, something's wrong. That was laid on Stevens. Stevens had one internal poll that you put out really early on, and then nothing after that. And then LC just cranking out the double-digit leads for months. Well, that must mean Haley's number is bad. Maybe she had internal polling showing she was down 2 points, and you wouldn't want to release that because it would counteract what LCE was saying, but it wouldn't be all that great for you. But it did actually show that perhaps you still had a puncher's chance here. And some campaigns might say, you know what, because of that fact, let's just not send out the internals at all. Because if you do it once, you don't do it again, people are going to start to talk. So let's just not do it. So it doesn't necessarily
but if
tell
you're
you everything you
a
need to
candidate in a crowded race and your internal polling shows you're in the lead, how can you humanly be expected not to want to share that?
Because you don't want to, in LCA's case, don't make your people complacent. Don't treat these things like they are proof that everything is preordained. You want everyone to go, to the mat on election day, not assume that it's all over. So I get the incentive to try to legitimize a candidate who might not otherwise get the attention. I mean, look, we just saw so as I said this week, there's one pollster who's doing a lot of internal polls this cycle that have been very good. And that's public policy polling. Not totally perfect. You in the article you write about their polling on the California governor's race. Talk about that. They were working for Tom Steyer, and so their published internal poll there showed him tied for the lead with the Republican and Xavier Becerra trailing, and that proved not to be correct. But they were on point in Iowa Senate, Texas Senate, Illinois Senate, Minnesota Senate, even in Wisconsin, where they were working for Crowley, they did a top line number, which like the others said, okay, we have Hong up by 18 in our initial top line. But then we did a so-called informed question where they clearly did some negative stuff on Hong versus positive stuff on Crowley. And then said, look, we're going to assume an older electorate than what we have been assuming. And when we do that, it ends up being a dead heat, which is what it actually turned out being, because that negative stuff on Hong actually was getting filtered in to the electorate late in the game. So it proved sometimes that stuff is putting your thumb on the scale. In this case, I think it showed what was actually happening. So anyway, so just this week, they do a poll for the new Democratic nominee in Kansas, who is a Methodist pastor named Adam Hamilton. He's got a really big congregation. And the incumbent there is Roger Marshall. Kansas is a very Republican state, but it hasn't had Democratic governor for 8 years. And has Hamilton down by 1 point. Now, it's an internal poll. Maybe they turn the dials a little bit to make him seem more competitive. I wouldn't base everything, I wouldn't make all my spending decisions based on this one poll, but maybe it's sending a signal, a credible signal, this guy's got a shot. Maybe you should think about putting some money in this race. Now, if I'm the Democratic National Committee, Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, I want more data than just that before I make that decision. But maybe it's worth sending my guys out there, doing some qualitative focus grouping, doing some of my own expensive polling, and seeing what I get for making a decision whether it's worth spending there or not. But that's where I understand the incentive to do it, because a guy you might write off, maybe you shouldn't write off. But if you don't do it accurately, you're going to give people a false sense of hope and waste a lot of money. So it's tricky.
You mentioned the prediction markets. I thought companies like Kalshi, they were supposed to be like the new polling. That was going to be, CNN, for God's sakes, has an agreement with them. They talk about their results. I thought that was supposed to be the new surveying of voters that was going to be much more accurate.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. This notion that if a bunch of people put money on the line, they would only do that if they had rarefied knowledge, and therefore you should trust where they're putting their money. Have you met compulsive gamblers before? Do you know? Are these people that really know everything they're talking about? Obviously not. And now we have two very clear examples that this is just mob mentality chasing conventional wisdom and bad polling. We have the Wisconsin race where Kalshi odds the day before had Francesca Hong with a 95% chance of winning and a 5% chance for David Crowley. In this less noticed race, there was a Hawaii congressional primary over the weekend. Forgive me, the last name I don't know how to pronounce properly, but there was a challenger winning against the incumbent Ed Case. The challenger put out an internal poll 2 days before, magically showing him beating Ed Case, and with no other obvious data to go with, Kalshi odds put him at 70% chance of winning, and Ed Case had 30% chance of winning, and Ed Case wins on Saturday by 21 points. And the defenders of these things saying, well, you should understand probabilistic forecasting. If a 30% chance means that could still win 3 out of 10 times, that's not suggesting he's going to win by 21 points. Come on. This was not based on real data. And in fact, a guy from Kalshi got in my X feed to challenge me on this. And I kept asking him, can you tell me what data you had that led your people to set these odds? What was so special about your information going beyond this one scrap of poll data that led to this odds making? And he would just not answer the question and would talk about something else, because there is no answer to that question. They don't have more information than you and I do. We can all read polls and we can make our own judgments based on one or two polls and think about how certain that is, or we can just go with the mob and lose a lot of money.
Bill, I found your article fascinating. You always write things that I'm interested in Washington Monthly. Thank you for being here to talk about it.
Always a pleasure. Thank you so much.